Mr. Eskenazi. It's an honor to do an interview with you, and thank you very much for being on our program. We are the Society for Ancient Chinese Art. Also called SACA. I'm aware that 2022 is the 50-year anniversaries exhibition of Eskenazi Limited. Obviously, your firm has been founded in 1962.
Yes, but for the first 12 years, we didn't have any exhibitions. So the firm was started in 62 with my late father. And then after my father died, I carried on. But we did not have an exhibition. The first exhibition was in 72.
In 72, yeah.
Yes, 1972. So tomorrow, the 50th exhibition in London, but not when we started, because as I said, we did the first exhibition 12 years later.
12 years later.
And then we tried to have thematic exhibitions in that we chose a subject more and more, which we wanted to do, unless we were selling someone's collection or selling a group of similar items. So we've had maximum up to 3 exhibitions a year, but usually it's 1 exhibition. We used to have Japanese exhibitions, but then we stopped that when the person running the Japanese person died. We didn't replace him. We just carried on with Chinese. I can see my book behind you.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. But that's the English edition. Do you have the Chinese edition?
No, but actually, I came to realize that the Chinese book has more content, right?
Yes.
It's different. Okay.
The Chinese, when we ran out of the first edition, the people who published it were Shanghai, and they suggested that we should do a Chinese edition. So we did a Chinese edition, but then the Chinese edition ran out, and they suggested we do a second Chinese book, always on the same style and exactly the same as the English and the first Chinese, but add all the things we bought, important things we bought in the last 10 years. So the most up-to-date is the second Chinese edition.
You have a wonderful exhibition for Asian Art London 25th year anniversary featuring 5 incredible Chinese objects. I saw it on your website, and could you share with us why this specific 5 items? Is there any link, or why did you choose these 5 objects?
Well, there is no link as such. They are, I believe, all of them of outstanding quality and rarity, particularly the jar, the blue and white jar. We loaned it to the Shanghai Museum a few years ago, and I went to Shanghai myself for the opening, and they put it in the entrance of the museum together with a Percival David vase, one of the pair of Percival David vases. So it was a great honor to have it in China, where it was admired for a few months, and then it came back. But all 5 pieces belong to clients of ours, European clients, and they're the best of their kind, in my opinion. So they were all happy to lend for this small exhibition of 5 pieces.
Wow, incredible! Especially the Southern Song Guan dish, which is rarely seen on auction markets nowadays.
Yes, exactly.
And looking back over your career, spanning well more than 60 years, what are the key moments or turning points for Chinese art that is worth noting? Could you share with us some insight for the Chinese art history over the last 60 years?
From my point of view, the most exciting period was my first trip to China. My first trip to China was in 71, 72. Mao Zedong was at the time in power. And we went to Beijing, and then we spent 3 weeks touring China. We went, like everybody else, to the Great Wall. We had to do that. But then I saw what was in the museums. And the museums had very wonderful things which we didn't know or which we didn't have and hadn't seen. So it was very interesting to see Chinese art in situ, where it was made and where it belonged. And we went to various cities. We went to Hangzhou, we went to Luoyang, we went to Shanghai, and the tour was 3 weeks. And then from then on, I went to China every year.
Wow.
Sometimes twice a year. I frequently also went to Hong Kong because of the auctions.
Yes.
And that's really it. It's another way of looking at the Chinese art, seeing it in China, in Chinese museums, particularly in Beijing.
Yes. But I can imagine that that was 50 years ago, so that I can imagine that things have changed quite a lot. I don't know about the museum back then. Now the museum in China, they're pretty modern, but back then I guess.
Exactly. Now they're very modern, and they're very showy. They've got wonderful display cabinets where you
back then.
Back then, there were piles in different parts of the museum, but you could still, for example, Shanghai, the first museum, they are now on the third museum. They've even opened a new ceramic museum on the Bund.
Yes.
So a lot has changed. Also in Beijing, a lot has changed. The first time we went to the museum in Beijing, we were the only group of people. Now you have to queue for 2 or 3 hours unless you have a special ticket.
Yes, sometimes more than that. I mean, visiting museums suddenly becomes a fashion within the last 5 years. Before that, 10 years ago in China, you don't really need to actually queue. But nowadays, I can see that collectors, maybe it could be the gene of the Chinese people that they're very fond of collecting, so they're visiting the museum more and more now. So the queues are pretty serious. You need to actually book. And a small little questions about your first visit to China. Back then, was it able to handle the objects? I mean, if you were no,
you could not handle the objects. But for example, in certain museums, the larger pieces or the sculptures, particularly, they were open, were not cased. So you could get close, very close. But of course, you were not meant to touch them, and you were forbidden from handling them. But in certain cases, particularly with our friendship with the Shanghai Museum, making appointments to see particular pieces, then they do make them available in a private room for you to examine it. But of course, that's not widely accepted. It's accepted by specialists.
It's very difficult for Shanghai museums. And
unless you're a curator. If you're a curator,
the curator
example, from the Metropolitan or from Cleveland or for one of the American or even European museums, then they will allow you to handle it. But they have to know who you are and the way you handle it.
Yes.
You can tell straight away when somebody picks up something. If he's used to handling it, he doesn't pick it up by the handle. He doesn't pick it up with his fingers. You hold it in.
You hold it in your hands. Yes. And fashion comes in and out. I believe this is also the case for Chinese art over the last century. I mean, I can see that 1921, when the OCS had just founded, they're focusing a lot of things on Song ceramic, and then Song ceramic went out of fashion a little bit, and then it come back to fashion. And so could you give your Chinese collectors some advice on the topic of trends? Should they follow the trends? Because I guess we are sort of almost like the Britain in 1921. Everybody's starting to collect. Everybody was starting waking up to collecting Chinese art, just like the OCS situation now.
Well, the collection or the collecting is something very personal. There are people who are very interested in Chinese bronzes, Shang or Zhou bronzes, up to people who, I won't go to Taohuang, but people who go to Jiaqing, Qianlong, Kangxi, Yongcheng, 18th century porcelain, decorated porcelain. Then there are people who are interested in the Ming period, particularly in blue and white. And then there are people who collect only Sung ceramics, and so on. It's China has produced art for 3,000 or 4,000 years. So it's unlike other countries in Europe. If you took France or Italy or England, they have a shorter history than China, and they have a shorter history of art production.
The major forces of buying is still, back then it was Ming and Qing. Now it seems like moving towards Song ceramic. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that's not the case?
Well, yeah, there are people who appreciate ceramics and are very interested in Sung ceramics, all Sung ceramics. But there are also people who are interested in the 18th century, the later porcelains from Kangxi, Yongcheng and Qianlong, but that's a different group of people with more colorful and more maybe beautiful porcelains. And then there are people who collect only blue and white, and usually it's Yongle or Shuangte porcelain up to Wanli, and they are another group. There are very few people that I know these days who collect across the board. One of the reasons is the value. It's very expensive, and you need a lot of money to be able to cover the whole of the history of China,
the whole history,
which is 4,000 or 5,000 years. I mean, you can't possibly start buying from Shang or earlier up to Qianlong or later. It's
which leads up to my next question, which is how did you stay on top of the game? Do you think that knowing all these different periods is a necessity for a collector, or do you think that's a kind of like a object or the aim for every collector to try to collect broadly?
Well, I didn't go by personal taste. I went for the individual object. I wasn't interested in taste, because if a Sung piece came along, let's say Dingyao piece, molded or carved, which was as fine as a Yongcheng piece, to me there would be no difference. The difference is in the period. But the quality on every single period was exceptional, as you know. And it became, a wish to buy the best.
Do you think that a handling object is the secret to learn all the authentication of the object?
Well, I had what is the gentleman on the cover of the magazine called? Mawei
Mawei,
who's been to the gallery here a few times years ago, invited me to Shanghai at the university to give a lecture. And one of the students, there were over 100, maybe much people in the auditorium, asked me specifically, how do I tell a genuine piece from a fake? So
interesting question.
The only way you can do it is by studying. And studying means, first of all, looking at the object very carefully. But that's not enough, because you don't really know what you're looking at. The best you can do, if you want to learn, is go to a museum. You've got a first-class, wonderful museum in Shanghai. You go to the museum, you look at the piece which they have similar, you study it, and you go back to the dealer. You look at the piece, study it, Then you go back to the museum, compare it, then you go back to the dealer, you look at it again, and then you go back to the museum. And he said, I don't have time to do that. I want to learn straight away. Mawedu was so angry, he told me to shut up, to sit down and don't ask any more stupid questions.
Wow, of course.
The only way is to study. The only way to study is to look. And by looking, I mean is to penetrate, to look carefully with your eyes at what you're looking at. How is it carved? How was it molded? How was it, is it thin? Is it thick? Is the foot right? Is the carving on the porcelain right? And it doesn't take very long. Eventually you learn. Of course, we all make mistakes. We're all human. And usually mistakes are made when you hurry. When you are in a hurry to buy something, when the price is very tempting and you think it's cheap and you want to buy it, and then you buy a copy, you buy a fake.
Talking about the carving, I still remember a video by CNN that was with your interview when you bought the Ding carved bowl some years ago at sort of these auctions. And you were interviewed by Henry Howard Sneed on this beautifully carved Northern Song Ding bowl. Back then, the price was, I think it was 2.2 million US dollars, and we have nothing auctioned at that price back then. So everybody was had a little bit of a shock of the price. But looking back now, after many years, we start to know that, wow, there is only two pieces in the world. Of course, that price is a bargain.
Very cheap. Very cheap now.
Yeah, it seems pretty inexpensive now. And so when I look at the video again, when you're interviewed, I was surprised by how you can immediately tell the difference. That could be related.
It's not just looking at the difference, it's looking at the quality of the work, the quality of the carving, the quality of the decoration, and the actual ceramic itself, the way it's been potted, the way a small foot ring, you get a large bowl, and how it's decorated, how it's carved, how it's the floral, usually they're flowers, as you know, and the meandering, the leaves, the petals of the leaves of the flowers, and then you make up your decision of how good it is. Comparatively, you've seen similar pieces, a little worse, but maybe much better in museums, and you aim at trying to acquire this particular piece. And very often, of course, you've got to pay more because you're not the only one in the world who can recognize the beauty of a Chinese pot from another.
And often the higher value in prices also influence the market in a positive ways. This similar sort of items become more expensive and the market gets easier. So I think in a way that you are also contributing to the field.
Yes, unfortunately. Unfortunately.
No, but then
you contribute, but you pay the price.
But then that piece of thing would be many folds of the price nowadays.
Yes.
And you have a big group of Chinese collector friends because I run social medias, and whenever I post an article that has mentioning your names, or when I post a video that has you in the video, it immediately becomes very popular. Could you give us some advice on collecting for Chinese people, Chinese collectors?
The advice, I think, starts at the beginning by you making up your mind what you want to achieve. Excuse me. What do you want to achieve? Do you want to achieve quantity or quality? If you want to buy quantity, that's very easy. You just keep on buying and buying. But very often they cannot tell the difference between a very fine one and a lesser fine one. I'm not saying a poor one, but I'm saying less fine.
Less fine.
If you want to buy the finest, then you have to wait, you have to be patient, because they don't come up so often. As you know, the auction houses, Chinese auction houses, as well as Europeans, once, twice, maybe a few times a year, they have a very important and very fine piece. But a lot of the time, to fill the auction, they have mediocre pieces or poorer pieces, or genuine fine pieces which are damaged. You know, they have a crack or they have been repaired. The only way really to learn is by looking. You got to look, you got to concentrate and look for the quality of the carving, the quality of the decoration. How fine is it? How close is it to the real flower, to the real leaf or the real stem?
Yep. So just by comparing, looking carefully, going to museums and go back to dealers, and could you also give us some ideas on how important or what's the role for dealer in this case? So that obviously you need to come back to dealer to study, to handle the objects.
Well, I mean, the dealer, it depends what dealer you're talking about. There are dealers who are more interested in quantity rather than quality. So you have shops, as you have in Beijing, in certain areas, shops which are full of ceramics. Many of them are absolutely genuine, but of poor quality or medium quality. If the seller is conscious that you really are looking for something very top, he will pull it out of a drawer or out of a cabinet where he's hidden it for someone special, and then he will take the pride that you are appreciating the top piece which he has put aside for someone like you. But he will not automatically show it to you, because you won't be able to tell the difference. You only tell the difference when you study and when you look carefully to the quality of the work, the quality of the carving, the quality, whether it's embossed, for example, raised, yao, molded, or whether it is carved. I don't think it's difficult if you put your mind to it. If you're in a hurry, you can't build a collection in a hurry. It takes a long time. And also it takes a good dealer, an honest person to help you. And also relationship with museums is very, very important. And museums are very helpful if they know that you are seriously interested and want to learn.
And you mentioned you need a little bit time to actually form a collection. And do you have a sort of a time frame on how slow was that, or what's the relatively ideal time span that you would recommend? Maybe you can put your goal into 30 years or 50 years.
Well, you've got to spend a long time. You can't form a collection, a fine collection, a first class, in a quick time, unless you're lucky and you buy someone else's collection, someone who's already spent 20 or 30 years building a collection, and he's too old, or he died and the children are not interested, and you buy his collection. But for you to start from zero, it takes a long time. It takes a long time because, like you today, there are many, many collectors. Many collectors, first of all, in the whole of China, which were not apparent 30 years ago, but there are now many collectors. There are collectors all over America, in Europe. You know, they're all countries that buy the top, and they try and buy the very top. And Chinese collectors, particularly the ones that travel and go to Europe or America, and also visit museums to see the equivalent. They can go to the Metropolitan, or they can go to Cleveland or Kansas City, which is a very, very old museum, the British Museum, and focus their eyes on that one piece. There are those people who just walk through as if they were in a hurry. They have learned nothing and they have seen nothing. Because if you ask them on the way out, what have they seen? All they will say is, I have seen 30 pieces of blue and white. But whether the blue and white was Schwante or whether it's Chenghua or whether it was a Kangxi piece, they have no clue. The only way you can have that is by looking at the labels, comparing it with the piece you're looking at, and then reading about it, reading what made this piece, who made it, under what circumstances. When they were making porcelains for Europe, they were making complete sets, huge sets, dinner sets. Well, that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for the one single top piece, and that takes time.
And you mentioned that unless you're lucky buying someone who has collected many years.
Exactly.
Congratulations on getting this, Sir Joseph Hotung.
Well, Hotung was, I've known Hotung for 40 years.
40 years,
I first met him in Hong Kong. I met him when he lived in Hong Kong, long before he came to England. We became friends. He bought several pieces from us, many pieces. He gave, I think, 200 pieces of jade to the British Museum about 20 years ago. He still gave a lot of things. And we bought now from the sale a few things. We didn't buy anything back from him directly, but I also represented him more than once at auction because he didn't want to go and bid himself. So he would go and look at something and then come and discuss it. He had a very good eye. He was a very generous man. And I think he was one of the most exceptional collectors, because what many people don't know is he collected European art as well. He had very good European paintings, European furniture. So his eye was very wide, looking at a very wide area, even with the porcelains. He had a lacquer head, as you know, swinging lacquer head, which is now in the British Museum. There are 3 in the world, and we have one of them. And he used to come and look at the one we had, but he couldn't buy another one because he had one. He loaned it to the British Museum. He loaned it. They had it for a few years, but then he missed it so much that he went to the museum and asked for it back. But since it was on loan, the museum gave it, and he had it opposite his desk, and he would look at it. Now the museum, now he has left it to the museum a few weeks ago,